And welcome back to the first ever UK Swiss Publishing Book Fair, brought to you by Literally Swiss UK and the Swiss Arts Council Pro Helvetia. This is a special one-day free digital interactive event bringing together the UK and Swiss publishing industries just for one day of panels and showcases. Now, need to say straight up, actually up front, that we can't fit in your questions. I'm really sorry about that. We just don't have the time. It's one book fair in one day. And so if you have any comments or questions you want to ask anyone you're hearing from today, we will pass on the questions. So put them in the Facebook comment area, okay? We're also on Twitter and on Facebook, and you can also contact us there. It's the hashtag is UK Swiss Book Fair. So you'll also be able to watch everything later on YouTube as well. And we've got a lot to fit in now into half an hour on with our panel on Swiss literature, all you need to know. Now, welcome to two colleagues who both share, for various reasons, a love of Swiss literature with me. And in Esther Schneider's case of broadcasting. Now, I was at the BBC for 20 years, and Esther is head of literature at SRF Swiss Radio. Hi, Esther. Lovely to see you.
Hi, hello. Nice to be here.
You're obviously not in the studio at the moment because we're all in our home studios, but
yes.
And welcome to Sean Williams as well, who's in his home studio. Now, Sean is, like all of us here today, a Swissophile, but he's also a podcaster, and his main job is as senior lecturer in German and European cultural history at Sheffield University. And he's also done a few stints on radio as well, talking about Switzerland. So we've tracked him down. And Sean and Esther, the very first question I'm going to ask you, because 3 years ago, I asked myself the question publicly and in an article for 12 Swiss Books and for our Swiss Riveter magazine. I asked, what is Swiss literature? Now, 3 years later, I'm getting a bit closer. Sean, what is Swiss literature?
Oh, talk about starting with the hard question.
Yes.
So I suppose I was going to come at this from the opposite angle and say, whilst obviously there is something specifically Swiss, now a lot of themes, such as when I wrote about swimming and swimming outdoors, are so resonant with us today, and we talk about them all the time, but from an Anglo-centric perspective. So in some senses, I think Swiss literature is just the same as British literature and British culture, but it enables us to give it a bit of a different spin and talk about it in a less Anglo-centric way. And that hopefully gets out of answering your question, Rosie.
It sort of does, Sean. Now, Esther, from your point of view, also, you know, personally, professionally, how would you describe Swiss literature to somebody who didn't know?
Oh, that's very difficult, Rosie.
Forget the difficult questions that way. Okay.
I think Swiss literature is a part of the German-speaking literature. And so we have Germany, we have Austria, we have Switzerland, and I think you can't speak of a special Swiss literature. I see it in a whole with the German-speaking literature. But in Switzerland, we have the thing that we have 4 languages. So we have also the French-speaking Swiss literature, and we have the Italian-speaking Swiss literature, and Romansch, Rätoromanisch, and then we also have dialect Swiss literature. That's probably a difference, yeah, we could say, to other German-speaking literature.
I think, Sean, you'll see this too, I'm sure, that the dialects and the villages and so on, they participate so much in Swiss literary life. And it does lend a real flavour to Swiss literature. I think there's a lot about, you know, mountains, nature, village life.
Absolutely. And I think, to come back to your original question, that diversity, the different languages, the fact that German Swiss literature is part of the German literary market means that Swiss literature is very centred on that question, what is Swissness? And that leads to the evocation of mountains, of stock images of Swissness, cows, cowbells, etc., but also more political questions that are very, indeed. But, relevant to us today, migration, for example, the question of European identity. All of these are topics that come up time and time again in the latest writing coming out of Switzerland. And it's maybe being a bit devious moving from Switzerland to Liechtenstein, but Switzerland represents Liechtenstein abroad. Take a novel from this spring about Liechtenstein by Benjamin Quaderer is really a whole novel about the globalized banking sector.
Yeah.
So it's a way to show a microcosm of the world, you could say.
Yes, but regarding the new releases this year, I mentioned that historical topics were quite prominent. I don't know if you have seen it, also, but no fewer than 3 titles on the Swiss Book Prize shortlist have a historical political theme, which is about coming to terms with history. I also notice a new way of dealing with these topics. I'm thinking first and foremost of Dorothee Elmiger's novel Aus der Zuckerfabrik, in which she tackles the subject of colonialism. And the book was also shortlisted of the German and Swiss Book Prize, and that's extraordinary. And also, the format is striking. It's neither a novel nor an essay, and neither pure fiction nor non-fiction. But I think she's also in a tradition. This political and historical topics are important in Swiss literature this year.
But why do you think that's changed, Esther?
What do you mean with changed?
Well, you say this year, these are the trends you see, or do you see this as a continuation? Or
yes, it's a continuation, and it's this year. I can mention 3 novels. It's also Karl Rühmann with his epistolary novel The Held, The Heroes, and Charles Lewinsky with Halbblut. He also deals with processing the past, and the latter deals with Swiss myths using the example of Battle of Moorgarten. It's a topics I think that's important. It was always important in Swiss literature, I think.
Do you think, Esther, there's always something that I've noticed over the last few years, also attending book fair, and festivals in Switzerland before the pandemic, that there was a lot of performance, spoken word culture. Is that still, that's been a difficult time, I imagine, in the pandemic for that particular art form in Switzerland?
Yes, it's very important. You have seen it also at the Solothurner Literaturtage, but there is another festival, Words, in Lucerne, that where you can see many writers and artists with spoken word. Also, spoken word text is in Swiss German and in German, and that's something we also see, that the subject of language and dialect is important, and the Swiss German dialects, they are very popular here, noticeably also among young people, because every day WhatsApp messages, for instance, are written in Swiss German and not in High German, and it's becoming obvious that we can reach out to young people or a new audience in this way when we also speak about this spoken word scene. It's very important for us, also on the Swiss radio. Yeah.
Now, we need to point out, of course, that because of the way Switzerland geographically and linguistically is created, that SRF Radio covers German-speaking Switzerland.
Yes.
And you're head of books for SRF German Radio, basically, it's national radio, but it's about two-thirds of the population. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, could say so.
So what about SRF German with, working together with the other language stations on books and literature? Do you do that, or is it all quite separate?
It's quite separate. Unfortunately, we don't work together very much. Although Switzerland is a quadrilingual country, there is little exchange between the radio stations in the daily business, I say. There's just a language barrier, I could say, because we are not multilingual at the station on the radio. But one of the few opportunities where we do meet is during the literature days in Solothurn, for example, and I appreciate that very much. But in the daily business, we don't have much in common.
Sean, have you been to any of these Swiss literature festivals? Have you been to Solothurn, which is such a great international festival?
I haven't been to Solothurn. I have been to Thun and some of the other smaller festivals. Yeah, and check in where I can now in their online form.
But that's, if you like, one of the great opportunities of the last few months, that initially none of these festivals could take place, but now, you know, we can all join up. It's been extraordinary. And I think, you know, as far as festivals for Switzerland and the UK goes, hopefully we can continue our contacts with you, because
Yes.
we'll be able to zoom in wherever we are. We don't have to, I mean, travel's still going to be difficult for the next year, I'm sure. But Esther, as far as what you're doing, I mean, I'm so full of admiration for SRF Literatur. It's an incredible website. And the radio is just, what you've done for books in a few years has just been incredible.
Oh, thank you.
They're really amazing. Since I've been working with the Swiss, I've just really enjoyed listening and reading your website. You adopted the digital pretty early on, actually, and you've created these archives and so on for authors. What are your plans for the future for radio? What else are you planning to do for books?
We have, I think, over the next few months, we will develop new audio formats that will also appeal to an audience under 45 years of age. I think it's very, very important to reach this audience. We also want to bring Swiss literature closer to this younger audience, but we also continue to do broadcasts on SRF 2 Culture, or also on SRF 1. So we have to do both. I think it's very important. And then, of course, probably you know, we have our platform Ansichten.ch. This is a platform on which we portray Swiss authors. We introduce them with black photos, audio and video clips, with readings and with excerpts from conversations from our audio and video archive, and with short biography and short review of a book. And this platform gives a good overview of contemporary Swiss literature, including from Italian, also Rätoromansch and French-speaking Switzerland. That's something that's very important. And we have just launched a new podcast together with a web video on the subject of dialect. So we discuss topics around language and dialect. This is also part of the responsibilities of the team.
It's fantastic, and anybody who's interested in Swiss literature and can understand German and dialect should definitely click on. It's Ansichten. Just give us the website again.
Yes, Ansichten.ch.
Ansichten.ch. And for people to listen to SRF, Esther, what is how can they listen to SRF?
We broadcast both on the cultural channel SRF 2 and the mass media channel SRF 1, and we produce several long background formats such as 52 Best Books, a talk show with authors, and roundtable discussions in context, but also Bookmark, Buchzeichen, and Literatur im Gespräch. That's a conversation about literature, but also we supply the news with literary topics, and we also deliver articles with literary content for the news app. So we deal with wide-ranging topics on the team, on air and digital. And then we have our TV show, Literaturclub.
Well, I mean, congratulations on all of that. I mean, basically, SRF, just for people in the UK listening, it's like the BBC. So just, that's a good thing. I worked for the BBC long enough. Now, Sean, bringing you in here too. You're a great absorber of all this information as well too, and I know that you've worked, very closely on German cultures, particularly. What's been your interest in Switzerland? How did you become a Swissophile?
Well, by accident or biography, I suppose. I did my doctorate in German in Britain, and then my first job was in Bern in Switzerland. And so then firsthand, I became interested in both Swiss literature, and I met and became friends with Swiss authors as well. And lockdown was a time of reconnecting. So with one of those, I could make a podcast over lockdown, and just it's been ongoing really from a literary point of view and also a personal point of view. And it's as simple as that.
Now, your podcasts are things of great wonder, and people should definitely click on those. And maybe what you could do before we finished is just share on the chat or something. We can actually share the podcast details, unless you can always give them to us later. I don't know whether you've thought around that, but we want people to listen to those podcasts.
Yes.
Now, I know that Esther would like us. We'd all like to. I've heard them.
I would like to.
Yeah. Now, you have actually talked on BBC Radio 3 and Radio 4 about Switzerland. What did you talk about, and what do you think people in the UK are interested in?
Well, so the Radio 4 piece was on open book about wild swimming, and this is, of course, was anyway a topic that was pretty well worn in the cultural sphere in Britain. But over lockdown, when pools were closed, of course, we all went to our local natural waters. I recorded it in a freezing mill pond in Derbyshire, the things one does to get on the radio. But the point was that I'd written an article for the Literary Review about swimming in Switzerland, in the Aare, in Bern, through reading novels about swimming. And the broader point here is that I think long-form cultural journalism really thrives on literary references, broader stories that resonate with people, and because we're in Britain, are so often Anglo-centric. And so it's not necessarily about selling it as Swiss, but the topics and themes that come up so often in Swiss literature are a nice way in to giving a new spin on these topics. So Swiss Swimming was one. The Lockdown podcast with Tabea Steiner, who was nominated for the Swiss Book Prize last year with her first novel, was another. And then I'm currently writing a piece for the Literary Review on cows, reading Levine Westermann's latest collection of essays, including on vegetarianism and animal rights. What could be more Swiss than the cow? But in that case, we've seen this year in Britain books such as James Rebanks's memoir and essay from his perspective in the Lake District on cattle, on farming and so on. And Switzerland again enables us to kind of give a foreign colour and a different perspective, whilst tapping into things that are really talked about in the British cultural sphere. So,
have you also found, one of the areas that I'm a mountain lover, and of course, Switzerland for me is mountains, lakes, and okay, there are a few cities dotted around as well, but just very important cities. But that for me is a way of always interesting people in the UK and Switzerland to talk about the mountains, because from a media point of view, when you try to think of how are you going to get British media, UK media interested in Switzerland, you're right, you have to talk more in themes, because still, unfortunately, the authors themselves are not particularly well known. Do you find that, Sean? Is that something that you
I think you're absolutely right. And take mountains, and the idea of mountain spas and hotels and hiking is what drives Rose Tremaine's wonderful novel, The Gustav Sonata, for example. And so English authors, and if you go back to the 19th century, the Alpine Club, the English have long been a fan of the Swiss mountains. And if you take things like that, it's pretty easy to find a set of committed Swissophiles who will tune in or listen. And then with authors, yeah, it requires a lot more work if you're going to do it around the name of the author in particular. I'm excited to watch your videos later, and one of them is by Martin Dean, and thanks to David Beck in the embassy, Martin visited us in Sheffield. We hosted him to work with students. But the interesting thing there was that David was able to fund it provided we brought in a public audience from outside of the university. And obviously I earn my day job. My day job is at the university. And I think there's an opportunity for us to host and act as a sort of way in to readings and public audiences outside of London when hosting Swiss authors. And that enriches the work we do with our own students and our seminars as well. So our students loved just, I don't wish to fetishize the author here, but, you know, seeing a real live author whose text they were translating that hadn't been translated already was of interest to them. And then through kind of having the space and the media teams and stuff at our university, we were able to try and organize a reading. And I think that's an opportunity for us in collaborating with publishers as well.
That's great. But can I give you a question? Where do you get your informations about new books from Switzerland? How do you inform yourself?
I'm afraid it's very unsystematic. So I do listen and read SAF, and I'm not just saying that because you're on the call. Also, there's a bit of it's a bit unfair, you know. I write to my friends and say, "What are you reading? What do I need to look at next?" So it's very unsystematic. And then I try to get over to Switzerland once a year since having left in 2015. That's not been possible this year. But so it is really just reading the Swiss media. I have the Enterzet app on my phone, and the general things. There isn't a go-to place that I look at.
Those are all good tips, I think. The Neue Zürcher Zeitung has got a really good website. SRF's website's fantastic as well. And there are French websites too, and Italian. I mean, we mustn't forget. But Esther, have you got any tips for how in the UK we can better work with Swiss media? Because it's really important, I think, that we keep up these contacts. I mean, we've been trying for the last few years to just make, you know, our very narrow-minded media more interested in international topics, but Swiss is even more difficult.
Yeah. Oh, that's very difficult. I think you're doing a great job, Rosie. I think you have to continue. And even so, every interest in Swiss literature in all the four main languages is important for us. And yeah, and I think it's important that as many as possible books could be translated into English. So that's possible that in English, that in UK you can read the books. I think that's the big problem is, yeah, how to find the books you think it would be worth to translate or would find an audience in UK. I don't know.
Well,
I think you have.
That's the work of Pro Helvetia, and
yeah.
Which, you know, I think they've got, you know, fantastic ways of approaching that. But it is really important, I think, you know, how we all communicate, particularly through the media. You know, I've been working in the media for so long that it's obviously something. It still baffles me how we can make translated literature in the UK, and Sean will know this as well because it's such a tiny percentage of our market. How we can draw attention to that and how we can better promote Swiss literature in just generally, I think.
But how is the media in UK? Are they really interested in Swiss literature?
I'm going to ask Sean that question.
I think they're getting better at it. I'm thinking of, so when I did the little essay on Swiss swimming, that was part of a wonderful open book episode that was talking about the chapbooks coming out of Norwich of Dutch stories, for example. And so I think there is among dare I say, I think among producers and editors, there's a real interest in getting beyond English-only material, and at the same time, a fear that it won't resonate. So that's why I tend to emphasize the thematic angle, and I actually find, maybe just because they're very lovely people, you know, editors and producers wanting to do more of this, but wanting a rationale or a reason to why they should do it or could do it. And Rosie talking about the mountains, you know, when Theresa May went on holiday in that controversial period, she went hiking in Switzerland. So that was a moment where you could suddenly talk about hiking in the Alps again, and it was in the news. But those moments come very seldom, really.
Yes, but that's good advice, though. I think and I think you'll hear it in our next session as well, our next panel, which is where we've got 6 festival directors from Switzerland and the UK, and they're going to be talking about what makes a really good festival. Now, I'm going to have to ring the cowbell to say that our session this is actually a Swiss cowbell in Wiltshire. There you are. I'm going to thank Sean Williams and Esther Schneider so much, and I hope that the collaborations will continue. And Esther, thank you so much also for the last few years. It's been really wonderful to be in touch with you, and good luck with everything. And yes, so thank you to our panelists for a fantastic discussion, and let's keep talking, because these discussions are just, you know, just the beginning.
Thanks so much, Rosie.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosie.
So
you do a great job.
Thank you, Esther. You too. And our next panel will begin in a couple of minutes. So thank you.